Okay, and welcome back, everybody. And as you can see, I am joined by our heroes and by Ricardo. So my job is very quick and simple here. I'm going to hand over to you guys to say hello, and I'm going to hand over to Ricardo to host from here.
Okay, thank you, Phil. And hello, everyone, and welcome to the Q&A panel. So this is your chance to ask experts, so the AWS Heroes, on anything on containers or serverless that you've been thinking about over the last couple of days. So please use either the Attendify app or the Twitch channel. But before we get to that, I'd like very much for the AWS Heroes to introduce themselves. So if we could ask each of them just to give a quick introduction before we dive into the questions. So I don't know who wants to begin first. Maybe you, Liz.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So I'm Liz Rice. I work with Aqua Security. I spend all my time thinking about containers and security, and I run open source. So I do lots of open source things, and I'm involved with the CNCF Technical Oversight Committee that I chair, and I'm an AWS hero. So
cool.
Thank
you. Thank you. So maybe you next, Effie.
Yeah, sure. AWS Hero, serverless AWS Hero from last January. I'm leading the development of Lumigo's R&D, an observability SaaS company. I've been using serverless in the past 4 years, mostly with Python. I'm really obsessed with serverless testing and serverless development flows. I had a chance to write a couple of blogs on the subject and have a couple of sessions, even with you. 15 years in the industry, working mainly with backend mobile applications. That's it.
Brilliant, thank you. And finally, Jan, please give us a quick intro.
So AWS Serverless Hero, working with AWS for more than 10 years now. Spent half my time working with Lumigo as a developer advocate, working with Effie and the other guys at Lumigo. The other half of my time I work as an independent consultant where I work with companies, helping them adopt serverless.
Okay, brilliant, excellent. So hopefully that's given everyone a bit more of a flavour of the skills and the background of our heroes. So whilst I'm waiting for a few questions to come through, can I first ask the panelists? It's been 2 days of amazing content over ComSum, but what have been the highlights for you so far? So if I can maybe go straight back to you, Jan. What have been the highlights so far for you for ComSum?
The fitness session has been really fun. I really actually enjoyed the mastermind game.
Right answer. Cool. And you, Effie?
Actually, there was a very neat session by Barak Schuster about security, securing your stack, securing your serverless application or your containers. I really like the examples. I really like the open tools. I'm definitely going to use some of the tips he gave there.
Excellent. Okay, brilliant. Yeah, that was a great session. I checked that one out as well. And finally, you, Liz, what have been your highlights so far?
Obviously, I was going to say the mastermind, but that's been taken away. There's a couple of sessions that I didn't manage to catch because life and things. There was the thing about rotating keys, which I really want to catch up on. So I think probably mention that, and maybe I'd also mention Rick's container talk this morning because. Right.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Cool. Excellent. So before I kind of crack on with some of the questions, obviously, the theme of ComSum is allowing a lot of people to learn new subjects. And so on this theme of education, I just want to give a quick plug to the AWS Restart program. So I know Phil mentioned this yesterday, but we actually have just got 25 very passionate learners graduating from our 12-week boot camp in Manchester. So if you are looking for people who are hungry to learn and want opportunities, then please get in touch. So with that out of the way, and sorry for that shameless plug for Restart, can I ask the first question, which is basically, education is a theme, right? So when people are joining this session, that some of them might be beginners, some of them might be experienced, but wanting to learn about containers or serverless. Can you share what you think are good resources that these people can actually start to learn either about containers, observability, security, serverless? What are the kind of essential resources you think that to get people started? So if I could start with you, Liz, on that one.
Right. Well, I'm hoping somebody else can help me out because I can't remember the name of them, but there are those online AWS workshop things. Do you know the things? There's one for like EKS, and you can go in and play with things online. So there's, I think, a handful, maybe 3 different AWS. I will look them up and post in the chat, but they're really good. And sort of along similar lines, O'Reilly have this thing called Katacoda. And again, you can go in and sort of work through scenarios. I feel like actually doing stuff with the kind of instructions right next to you. For me, that's a really effective way of learning. Okay,
cool. Excellent. And Jan, if I can move over to you, what would you...
Rick's posted, sorry, it's a EKS workshop. And I think there's a couple of other like something else workshops as well. Yeah.
Okay, good. Actually, there is we have got a link of kind of like a curated list of all AWS workshops, container servers, and more. So I'll share that in the window after this panel session. So moving on to Jan, how would you get started? Or if you were either a beginner and wanted to get to start with serverless, what ways do you think make sense for people to start?
So there's this guy called Jeremy Daly, who's also an AWS Serverless hero as well. So he's got this really nice newsletter that he publishes every week, where he sort of collects all the articles from all over the place. And then there's also a bunch of different workshops you can find online. Some of them are free. I know Marcia, who's also a server, well, no longer a hero because she works for AWS now.
She's in my team. Yes, that's right.
Yes. So she's got lots of videos on YouTube, which I find really useful in terms of just getting a very high level overview of different services, just get some coding examples going. And then there's also, I guess, some paid like courses out there. I've got a couple myself, and then there's loads of blogs from different people. But if you want to learn by reading, then Jeremy Daly's Off by None newsletter is kind of your go-to, because he's kind of just does the job and then collects all of the articles from everybody.
Yeah. Indeed. That's good. Effie, what about yourself? What's your learning style? How do you learn these new things?
So to be honest, I really don't like videos. Usually I have to wait until they actually reach the interesting stuff, and I prefer blogs or actually something that is written. Actually, a lot of people are bashing the AWS documentation, and I really like it. Every time there's a new service, and even old services, most of the time I start there by reading what does it mean, how does it work, and going forward and starting to go deeper into more details. I start looking for other stuff. And again, when I started learning about serverless, actually the first blog post that I read were by Jan, I think on Medium. These were the blogs that actually started my entire serverless journey. So again, I'm a lot of things changed since then, and I'm not sure how well they are adapted to the current state of serverless. But when I started everything, really, these blogs were my my source of truth.
Yeah, it's interesting. So different styles, whether you like vlogs or whether you like videos. And I'll post a link to Marcia's YouTube channel, because it's great. Like you said, Jan, there's loads of really good sort of bite-sized chunks and really good from beginners to more advanced. So actually, can I ask maybe a slightly different question? So, is there anything new you're learning? So you're already established in serverless and containers and security, but what new stuff are you guys learning at the moment? So maybe Liz, what is there anything apart from the drums, maybe? Is there anything new you're learning?
I'm struggling to find the time, but the next thing on my list I really want to take a look into is WebAssembly. I've been saying that for about a year, but that is definitely high up my list right now.
Okay, so for people who might not know what WebAssembly is, what is WebAssembly?
So ask me in a few weeks when I've actually looked at it properly. But yeah, being able to
sorry,
I don't know quite how to describe it. I'm going to say the wrong phrase, and then somebody will pull me up on it.
Okay. I apologize for putting you on the spot there. Yeah. Okay. What about you? What about you, Jan and Effie? What about? Is there anything you're currently you're eyeing up to learn that you don't already know?
I'll start. So actually, there are a lot of things that I don't know. Most of the things I don't know. Right now, we are working very hard on incorporating security as part of our CI/CD process. So that's why I got very, I really loved Barak's session, because it really, it's a very painful point right now in our entire process by doing the entire security overview manually, and we really want to automate it. So there's a lot of stuff that I'm learning there.
Cool. Excellent. And Jan?
Yeah, so anything to do with front-end development, Vue.js probably is my been on my list for a while. I'm just a long-term back-end guy. Can't write the front-end code to save my life, so I need to improve round up my skills a little bit.
Yeah, we have a little joke with some of the SAs in AWS, and one of them actually put their hand up and said, "Oh, I'm learning front end stuff," and now we just call him front end guy. So now it's always in front. So be careful, okay? You might become the front end guy. Okay, all right. So let's move on. So I'm just checking to see if any other questions have come up. And I'll come back to, because I can't see any new ones at the moment. Changing tack from education to something slightly different. Okay, so on the panel, we've got, serverless and containers very well represented, okay? And increasingly, both of those are getting, increasing developer mindshare. But which would you choose for your next project? And how do you choose one over the other? So maybe potentially quite a difficult one here. Jan, can I start with you?
Yeah, sure. So I guess for me, it's always going to be serverless first. And if I'm running to certain limitations on the platform that makes it really difficult to do something with serverless, then I'll go the next best thing, which is Fargate, I say. So at my last full-time job at the Zone, we had quite a mix of containers and serverless Lambda functions running side by side. Oftentimes, the decision point there is if it is something that's going to be very spiky, very high volume traffic, so that either with Lambda it's just not cost efficient to run them, or it's something that's so spiky that you end up having to use all these different weird like provision concurrency just to manage to get the scaling you need. Like at the Zone, we go from a couple hundred to 1.2 million concurrent users in like 30 seconds. So right. Lambda is very scalable, very good for spiky traffic up to a point, and we are way above that point. So things like that, I would say, containers still the way to go. And some long-running ETL jobs that you can't break up into smaller pieces, then I would say those will probably be a good fit for containers instead of serverless as well.
Okay, good. Okay, Effie, what about yourself? Do you have like an internal mechanism or checklist that whether to decide serverless versus containers or something else?
Yeah, it's a very good question. It really depends on the performance we're looking for. We have a couple of places in our backend architecture where we use containers. We use Fargate. Places where we need performance, especially low latency. Web low latency, where API gateway plus a Lambda didn't work very well, so we did a transition. But as Jan mentioned, we are really serverless first, and we prefer first to look at serverless solutions, assess them, and then in case the performance are not good enough, then we choose a container-based solution. But up until now, except for this point, everything is serverless.
Okay. And Liz, is this something that do you ever consider serverless at all, or is it for you containers always, or how do you approach this?
Yeah, so serverless definitely seems very appealing to me for a certain class of problem solving where I can very easily imagine how API hits this Lambda function, does a thing, comes back. I can hold that in my head and see that as a very sensible solution. And, the scalability, the number of things that you don't have to worry about, great. So I'm not in any way against serverless. I do think that when you get to something that's a really very complex problem, maybe trying to break it down into serverless and events is perhaps even adding even more complexity, and particularly long running jobs or things that require a significant chunk of processing maybe are better off run as a long-lived container job. So I don't think either serverless or containers are like the hammer for every single nail. I think you have to look at the application. in mind.
Yeah.
I also am very aware that because I've never been through that process of trying to do something really complex with serverless, I don't know how you go about breaking down that problem. So that's a whole area of expertise that maybe Jan and Effie, could explain to me, and I just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'll come to that actually in a subsequent question actually. So good point, and we'll park that for the moment. But maybe with a kind of maybe taking your security hat on, Liz, do you see a difference between security and the approach you take with security in containers? And also, you had a great session earlier on about how you manage that, which is great. And maybe serverless. Is there do you see a difference, or and so far we've not even talked about other stuff, right? Virtual machines, right? So from a security perspective, what do you see the key difference between serverless and containers?
So I think a big part of it is what you do or don't have control and responsibility over. If you own the whole virtual machine and you own the isolation between the different workloads on that machine, you have to be responsible for that, and you also can control it, and you can determine what isolation you want for those jobs. If you're dealing with serverless, it's out of your control. It's probably running on something really cool like Firecracker, so that's great. But in terms of just workload isolation, you don't get to make your own decisions.
Got you.
Pros and cons of that. And then the whole CI/CD thing, the whole, you're still, when you're running, let's say, a Lambda function that's running on Python, it's still got the same kind of application dependencies, whether it's in a Lambda function or in a containerized job. So particularly that kind of application and package management dependency scanning should be the same, really.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, ultimately, you're still depending on the same open source components, aren't you? You still need to make sure that you're using the right ones, they're secure and all that kind of stuff. Okay, cool. Effie, from your perspective, from a observability, and sort of like logging and tracking and tracing perspective, do you see there being a difference between serverless and containers?
Yeah, I think that actually serverless is more difficult. In containers, although it's not old-fashioned, but I like to call it old-fashioned observability, where you have CPU and disk and all the things we already know and love, and we understand what high CPU means. But then suddenly when dealing with serverless and thinking about iterator edge or all kind of new jargon that you need to understand in order to make sure that your software works as expected, it becomes much more difficult. So definitely observability and monitoring for serverless application is more difficult, I think, for containers. For serverless, sorry.
For serverless, right? Okay. And Jan, what either on observability or security, have you had any experience on this? Do you see any pros or cons to both?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about both. Maybe starting with security. What I would say is that people get network security and virtual machine security wrong all the time. So by taking it out of their hands, I think it makes your application more secure by default, by a long mile. I mean, I've seen people do silly things with the Kubernetes cluster, like leaving it open to the public. So I can use Kubernetes console control to control my cluster from my laptop. Guess what? So can everybody else. And we've used tools to see, what ports we can scan, and we can find all kind of weird things open on the internet, including Kubernetes cluster. People get that wrong all the time. So if you even take that away from people's hands, I think it's great. And by default, that just eliminates a whole class of security problems that people run into. Like Liz said, the application level security, your dependencies, DDoS attacks, and dealing with AWS limits, that still applies to everybody. If anything, some of the limits you got to deal with are more intricate, because every layer has got some very limiting all the way down from APIs to your Lambda functions to DynamDB, and the DDoS becomes what we call denial wallet instead of a denial service, because you can kind of brute force your way through it, but it's going to cost your arm and a leg. So security-wise, I think in general, the fact that you don't have to worry about you don't have to worry about platform and in the infrastructure security almost never with serverless. If you're just using serverless components, makes the application a whole lot more secure. Now, the kind of attack that we've seen in the industry that targets infrastructure is just so common, happens all the time. So you imagine if you don't have to worry about that, it makes your life as a security person a lot easier. And I've spoken to a lot of companies through my blog, my podcast. A common theme that comes up a lot is, well, we choose serverless because it makes us go faster, but also enterprises, it becomes a lot easier to sell them what we're doing when we talk about serverless, and the fact that AWS is securing the all infrastructure beneath us. The fact that a lot of the sort of common things people have to do, like scanning ports and closing down ports, well, we don't have to worry about that anymore because you can't log on to the server that's running our code. We can't do it either. I think that's great. It makes the application a whole lot more secure. When it comes to observability, I don't really agree that it's harder. I think it's different. Once you know how to do it, it's actually a lot easier because, again, I've spent a lot of time debugging why is my log collection agent not working properly, or suddenly the what do you call it, staticity, whatever, just stop working, the agent dies on a box. I don't have to worry about that anymore. I get all of that out of the box. So it's great to get to maybe this level out of the box with the things that you get with CloudWatch, with the things that you get from CloudWatch logs. However, to get to the next level, which you can actually quite easily do with containers if you know what you're doing, you just have to know what's the right approach to do that. And there are tools out there that can let you do that a lot easier. You have to know, you have to learn to do that. I don't think it's difficult. I think it's easier, but it's different. The paradigm is different. There's some limitations on the platform which drives me nuts. Things like the fact you can only have one subscription filter by default, where everybody kind of wants to do multiple things with their logs, want to ship them to, I don't know, somewhere central, because CloudWatch logs is just not good enough. Logs Insights is improving things, making it a bit easier, but it's way more complicated to do, and it's also very limiting as well. You can only have 2 log groups that you query at a time. I mean, I don't even know which log group to look at when I just get a string I get from the customer saying, we've got this error, what's going on, right?
Yeah.
With an elk stack, I can just slap a string in there, and then that's it. I can find everything that's related and go from there. I can still do that with Lambda. It's just I need to know how to do that, how to set up my environment to do that. But once you know how to do that, it's actually a lot easier. What we do find is, especially with Lumigo, is that some of the tracing stories is a bit more interesting, a bit more difficult, because serverless applications are often a lot more involved in terms of background processing, lots of different events firing here and there, and tracing those are a lot more interesting and more challenging compared to what you do on containers, because you just don't do those kind of workloads very much on containers. So it's not that serverless more difficult, it's just you're building more complex event-driven systems compared to you would do, say, on containers. So I think it's just different, and the tools are getting a lot better. I mean, Lumigo is doing a lot of good work. I know I'm kind of biased, but I do think they are doing a really good job in terms of making all of that easier for customers. But what we find is, what I'm finding from customers is that, a lot of companies just never had to do that. All they ever had to do was just throw an agent on a box, and then that's it. They never had to done how to actually do it properly. I mean, people are still monitoring on the average latency, which we know for over 10 years now. It's just you shouldn't do that. Use 95 percentile, use 99 percentile, whatever. But suddenly people have to learn how to build microservices coming from a world where they run monoliths on on-premise servers to now microservices in all these different Lambda functions and using serverless components is a big jump for them. And that's where I think they're struggling. It's not that it's difficult to something really quick, but it just when you go into this new world.
Okay.
Sorry, that was a super long rant.
No, that so I mean, it's good. I think it's a good segue. We talked about it's not maybe it's different. Maybe not necessarily more difficult, but it's different. And Liz, you were talking about the fact that you're still not sure at the moment how to approach this. So let's look at that. So when I speak to companies and when I talk about serverless, one of I would say the questions that always comes up without fail, is I've got all these legacy applications, these monoliths, whatever you want to call them, and I want to decompose. I want to either move them to containers or to serverless, but they just don't know where to begin, right? They don't know how to start. They don't know what they should do, whether they should, start at all. So I'm keen to kind of get some, practical kind of like best practices, experience, and knowledge from you guys as to how, if you're thinking about this, where you should start. So Liz, from a container perspective, is this something you see? People, sort of decomposing those legacy applications into microservices delivered on containers. And I know, I think Itzio recently went the other way around, and they decided to go from microservices back to a like a micro monolith, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
So what's your experience, and how should people think about this?
Yeah, I think particularly if you've got some existing code base that you're thinking about migrating to anything, you have to have a good reason to do it, and don't turn it into any kind of decomposition just for the sake of it, because it's not like some kind of magic fairy dust that's going to suddenly make things infinitely better. But I think when people are moving to sort of decomposition, they're doing it, in my experience, they seem to be doing it because they want that kind of business agility. They want to be able to deliver functionality really quickly, and they want to be able to decouple the development of something over here from the development of something over there, different teams. So maybe thinking about how you can decompose things to, like, the Conway's law of sort of organizing things around your organization. So your code reflects your organization, or maybe your organization needs to reflect your code, but that may be one aspect to think about. Yeah, whether it's something that makes sense to decompose into serverless, the level of control that you do or don't need. Do you need the full control of I don't know, different Kubernetes operators or what have you? Maybe that's a very advanced step to be thinking about right from the get-go. I would definitely be thinking about what it is that you're trying to achieve before you try to figure out what the solution should be.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And I recently finished I can't remember what the title of the book is. It's another O'Reilly book by Sam Newson. I think it's moving to monolith. Oh, sorry, migration to
monolith to microservices.
That's the one. Yes, that's the one. Yeah, excellent book, and it's got lots of really practical guidance, including the very start of the book. It's like, are you really sure you want to do this, right? Which is kind of like echoing what you said there. Effie, what about yourself? What any experience you want to share with everyone around how you would approach this?
Actually, there are two approaches you can take today. I'm going to talk about serverless specifically. You can take some of your monolithic application, actually convert it as is to serverless. Although it's a big fat function, big fat lambda, but you can do the transition quite easily. There are a lot of frameworks today that allow you to do that. And I think that above all, it will give you the ability to taste and understand what serverless is, how does it work, understand the observability, the security, all the things you just mentioned. That's one way. Another way is choose the least important parts in your source code, in your code. Instead of choosing the core or the most dangerous part, choose something that are on the edge, that in case it will break or won't work, nothing bad will happen. And again, it will give you a chance to learn the new technology, because as Jan mentioned, and also others here mentioned, it's a new technology, new jargon that you need to learn, new capabilities. So you better learn it on something that you might break and you won't be sorry.
I've remembered something that I first, when serverless was sort of first coming up, and a model that kind of helped me understand how some things might lend themselves quite well, was thinking about how web frameworks work. So in a past life, I did some things with Django, and thinking about how, in those web frameworks, you typically have some kind of router function that's taking, here's a hit to a particular API, it's going to get routed off to some piece of code that will handle that API call. And saying, well, serverless is kind of like replacing that router function with something in the infrastructure, so you don't need to write it yourself, but you're still hooking up API call to the functionality. And I found that mental model really helpful to understand how you could go from the idea of one serverless function calling one piece of code to, you could build up a whole website, for example.
Yeah, good point. point. Jan, what about yourself? Your experience around people who are wanting to decompose existing applications to either serverless or microservices.
I've actually done this quite a few times for both myself as previous companies, but also for clients as well. You kind of just really start with, like Liz said, for a large company, you want to apply the reverse convex maneuver, work out, okay, how do we actually want to, what are the software that we actually want to write, and then you organize yourself so that you can align in terms of different components and layers and whatnot, and then you really just start and then apply the strangler pattern, which basically says you kind of strangle one part of your monolith at a time, and you start with the least business critical one, especially when you're trying out new technology, because you don't want, well, you're going to make mistakes when you try something out. First time you build something with serverless, you're going to make lots of mistakes. So factor that in so that you don't start with the most business critical thing and then you fail, and then no one's going to let you do this ever again. So you want to start with something that's least business critical to get your team familiarized with the technologies, and then you go from there. And I will also say that, especially for large enterprise, don't just open the floodgate all at once, because you're going to have 10 teams of people all trying to learn at the same time, all going to make the same mistakes, and then you're just really inefficient in terms of learning. So Simon Wilder talks about this idea of you've got settlers, you've got the pioneers, you've got people that's got different mindsets that makes them really suitable for maybe trying out new ideas. So you get your pioneers to do that, and then you've got people that are really good at taking an idea and productionizing into product features, and have those guys be your application developers and focus on that side of things. So having different teams and help them create a path for them early on to basically create a path of least resistance for them. I think that really helps in terms of these migrations. But yes, it all starts with what it is you're trying to achieve in the first place. And for most companies I speak to, velocity is the number one reason. And most of the company I've spoken with that's gone serverless, velocity is the big reason why they've done it, and the biggest benefit they see from going serverless.
Yeah, I think actually, I'm glad you mentioned Wardley. For those maybe who are watching who are not familiar, Wardley, Simon Wardley, he was a very early kind of like a sort of thought leader in when it came to kind of like the reasons why serverless was going to be a very dominant architectural approach for solving applications. And I encourage you to read his blog about worth-based development, which is a really interesting concept that he talked about long before a lot of this technology came about. So we've got some questions that have coming in from the Twitch and from the app. One of them, which is kind of related to this, and you've touched upon it, or when we talked about the path to migrating, okay, which is how do you demonstrate to the sponsors within the business, okay, the move to either serverless or containers? How do you show the value, the financial value of doing that? So if I could start maybe with you, Liz.
I think kind of like my previous question, you have to make sure that there is value. You have to check that it's it's going to be appropriate for your business and your particular application and your needs. And I think you can do sort of back of the envelope calculations on how much traffic you expect to receive and just work things out. I'm sure there are tools to help you figure that out. Corey Quinn's probably got something that you can use to figure it out. But you have to bear in mind as well that you're not just talking about the cost of the machines that you're paying for, your data center costs, or your cloud, your AWS bill, but you're also talking about the people cost. If you don't need people managing infrastructure, that is a cost saving potentially to your business. So you have to work it out. It's not like a magic, it's not always going to be cheaper, but it might be worth thinking about.
Yeah, good point. Effie, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree with Liz. I think that the main cost benefit, specifically in Lumigo and also in other places, is that you don't need someone special. You don't need a DevOps, a dedicated job to manage your cloud infrastructure. Now the developers are actually handling everything. It's part of it's part of their job. That's one place where you can save quite a lot of money and velocity as well.
Okay, and finally, yeah, obviously you touched upon, one of the key areas which is around, being able to sort of decrease the time to, develop new features and create value. Are there any other areas which, if you're starting off, you're really interested in serverless and want to, gain the support of a sponsor inside a company, how would you go about doing that?
Probably depends on the company and who I'm talking to. So if I'm in a company where there's just not a lot of traffic, it's not super high volume system, I may also just say, look, serverless is going to be a lot cheaper because you're paying for 100 servers that are running at 5% CPU, but you need it for certain spikes sometimes. With Lambda, it's going to be a lot cheaper because you don't pay for them when there's no request coming in. And also, I actually have got quite a lot of companies who's basically moving to serverless because they're able to save the tens of thousands of dollars a month on the AWS bill by removing a lot of these servers that they have to run on a fairly large fleet, even though there's not a lot of traffic most of the time. But at the same time, like Liz said, sometimes when you just have got a high volume system, that it may just be more expensive on Lambda, but you're going to save on people costs because you don't need the whole team of people looking after your fleet of containers environment. So serverless, actually, I think the biggest saving on a sort of corporate, like a company's level, is on that. What you mentioned about the work-based programming development, I do want to talk about that as well, because that's an idea we see more and more. The fact that this, which twofold. The fact that the serverless is pay-per-use, which means that you can actually very precisely, fairly precisely calculate based on a feature that we're looking to develop. This is roughly the return on investment we're thinking that how much revenue we're going to generate, and then how much it's going to cost us, and then you can, based on that information, work out, okay, it's even worth building this feature or fixing this problem, because the cost we're going to save on Lambda is going to be $10, and we're going to spend $400 on a meeting to just talk about how we're going to fix it. I mean, we have people telling me that, oh yeah, we got a meeting with 10 people talking about how we're going to save $10 a month on our Lambda bill. I'm like, are you crazy? That meeting alone is going to cost you $4,000 because you got the people involved to talk, and how long you have to talk about this before you do any work. And then the side of that is, you can also take this pay-as-you-use business model or pricing model that Lambda gives you as a business advantage. And we are seeing that now with a few customers, and I'm seeing that now with a few other people building platforms and services that also are pay-as-you-go. So if you look at some of these services, that a lot of services that we use, even things like Segment and things like that, they're super, super expensive. You pay basically a flat fee for a certain amount of assets, and then the next level is going to be $5,000 a month or whatever. Whereas with serverless, if you know the platform is going to give you pay per use, you can then have a pricing model that's based on that, plus a premium for whatever cost you incur on your customer's behalf, so that you can give your customer a pay per use pricing model, which means that for like smaller companies where they just want to pay the minimum amount they can, is much more attractive to them compared to someone else. And for enterprise customers who want a more predictable bill, even if they end up paying more, you can still just go for the sort of tier-based pricing that they're used to. So for that work-based program, the development, there's a lot of the performance optimization becomes the cost-saving exercise as well. So it means the finance and the development can work together.
Okay, thank you, Jan. Hopefully that answered the question from, I can't remember who answered it, but hopefully that's giving you enough things to think about. So we've got another question, and I'll open this up to any three of you who've got direct experience of, and that's basically, the use of Eventbridge. So for those people who aren't familiar with Eventbridge, Eventbridge is a new service that was launched late last year that allows you to extend the event-driven architecture outside of AWS. So the question is, how do any of you have experience of using Eventbridge in production, and how do you think the use of Eventbridge as a pattern compares to using other things like SNS or SQS? So I'll open that up to anyone who wants to answer that one.
So I can say that we've added Eventbridge a couple of months ago. We've added a new flow that sends all kinds of analytic data to external applications. And the analytics data is being triggered by all kinds of events in the system. So Eventbridge was a perfect fit, perfect match for us. So each part in our system that generates an event, push it to the Eventbridge, and the Eventbridge on the other side, there's a Lambda that listens to the various events and push it to the analytics side. And the interesting part is that we started with SNS and moved to Eventbridge. In the end, Eventbridge was much easier for us for development and for deployment. So I highly recommend.
Okay. So it doesn't work with some customers that are using Eventbridge now in production. So the thing about with SNS is that because you can only do attribute-based filtering, it makes it very difficult for you to use it as a centralized event bus for your whole application, where you've got lots of different things happening. Which means that you end up having different topics for different type of events. Whereas with Eventbridge, I guess that one of the biggest benefit for like a team that's building more complex things is that you can now actually have a centralized event bus for everything, because you can do content-based filtering. You can create lots of different rules that are targeting specific events. I mean, all the AWS events you get through Eventbridge are going to the same bus, and you're perfectly able to create the rules that target specific events from specific services that has got specific values for a particular field. Where it's kind of lacking a little bit in terms of some of the other support is it doesn't have delta queue yet. It doesn't have a very granular IAM permission. So when you want to say allow someone to put events, it's just a star. You have to let someone publish to everything. And I think the cross-account stories there is still lacking a little bit. You can do it. So you can have, say, I've had companies where you have one AWS account per microservice per environment, which means if you want to have a centralized event bus, you have to do that cross-account thing all the time, one for publishing the event and then one for subscribing, and which requires you to have two separate Eventbridge rules in two different accounts. So that story is still not that great for those kind of for that kind of setup, but it does work. But yeah, for me, I think probably the biggest benefit you get from Eventbridge compared to SNS is the fact that you can now have a centralized event bus for all of the events in your organization.
Okay, brilliant. Well, listen, we're at time now, I believe. So I just want to thank all of you for being on the panel and answering these questions. I also want to doubly thank you for doing the Mastermind Challenge. It was a pleasure working with you. You're great sports, and I really enjoyed doing that with you guys. We do have a request, and Liz, I'm not holding you to this, but someone's asked if you could do a drum outro for the panel, but I'm not going to hold you to that. But
Dave is on this. We have to show Dave's amazing music studio.
But without further ado then, because I know everyone's itching to get to the quiz, I believe, which we've got coming up. So again, I want to thank you again, and over to you, Phil.
Brilliant. Okay, so let me, Dave, how's my sound going? Am I good? There we are. I think that's good. Right, fantastic, everyone. Thank you very much for that. And Ricardo, I can't believe you let Liz off so easily on that drum outro.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, you're softer than I am then. I'd have pushed at that. Brilliant. Thank you again, everybody. Awesome work on that. And yeah, we are getting close to the end now. So if everybody